Hi, welcome to Talking Tech, the Inside View, where I, Caroline Hill, chat with legal tech leaders and get their scope on the key issues shaping the legal tech industry. If you haven't already, be sure to follow us on Spotify and YouTube for new episodes every month. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talking Tech. I am your host, Caroline Hill from Legal IT Insider, and today is our podcast on the impact of AI on talent and training and being prepared. And to help me unpack some of the issues, if we can call them issues or possibilities, perhaps, is Sam Dixon, who is a partner at Womble Bond Dickinson and Chief Innovation Officer responsible for the firm's innovation strategy. Hi, Sam.
Good morning, Caroline. How are you?
I'm really good. Thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so today, I'm grateful for your time. So we are going to be looking at lots of things actually, sort of perhaps the changes in way things are done thanks to AI. We're going to be looking at the changes in the way that tasks are delivered, particularly around who does what, so juniors and partners, and how perhaps AI is going to change that allocation of tasks. We're going to be looking at a couple of specific tools, which I think is really cool. This isn't about vendors, but actually, obviously, vendors fit very much, the tools that we use every day fit very much into this conversation. We're going to be talking about changes in training and education. And will we be able to simulate training? It's a big topic. And we're going to be looking at the changes in talent and careers, and perhaps do we need to be thinking about a different mix of skills? What does it mean in terms of the way that we provide advice? And also we'll touch on changes in client relationship management. I think we've got a bit to talk about. What do you think?
I think we've got a few minor topics to cover there, Caroline. Yeah.
And we're going to solve the whole thing today. Let's let's talk about the first. Let's start at the very beginning. So the way that tasks are delivered. So juniors, everyone's examining, doing some navel gazing in terms of who does what. You think that things, juniors might start to do different tasks, deliver things differently, thanks to, for example, using tools in Word such as Cascade and Definely. I know Definely well. I'm less familiar with Cascade. Talk us through that, if you don't mind.
So I think the first thing to say, Caroline, is I don't have any definitive answers. I'm not professing to be able to say this is exactly what's going to happen going forwards. I don't think anyone can. But where I think we might see some changes, as you say, is in the mix of who does what at what stage in their careers. And I think how it might change is there will be some tasks which historically perhaps junior lawyers might have found it harder to deliver or harder to take as far as they might be able to with AI. So I think AI, and we'll come back to this, can have a role in helping people to develop more quickly, develop those skills more quickly, essentially progress with their experience more quickly. There might be other areas where people currently are undertaking a particular task, but there might be a logic to other parts of the organization delivering that task. So, to give you an example, to put some flesh on the bones of that, if you take a legal research question, that has for many years been the bread and butter of a junior lawyer's role under supervision, and it's always been a collaborative process. Some of the tools that are becoming available now are really impressive. So we've been working with Co-Counsel and its AI-assisted research for some time, and that produced some really helpful output for us. But what's happened now is we've progressed to what they're calling deep research, and frankly, it's an order of magnitude better in terms of its output from what I've found personally in using it and what senior colleagues have found in using it. And there's always that question mark as to, right, well, we've got this new capability. What's the best way of using that? Who are the right people to be asking those initial questions and then spotting where there might be a need for follow-up, for critical analysis and for challenge? And there's always going to be a balance. But there might be a shift in who does what within those tasks because the experience does allow potentially people to leverage those tools in a way where they can get some really detailed legal research really, really quickly and drill down into the topics using their experience. That said, we do know that however strong a tool performs, there is a need for a human in the loop on these things. And I think what remains to be seen is even where a senior person is able to generate a really detailed research report very quickly, who's going to do the underlying verification of going through all the resources and checking them? So there might be a change in the mix of how that kind of task is approached, but I don't think there wouldn't be any role for a junior lawyer on it. I think there is still that role around the verification. And sometimes we might, as a profession, have to grapple with the idea that the most efficient way of doing something isn't always going to be the best, and it might be we have to give people some tasks purely from a learning and development point of view in order to allow them to develop the skills.
I think that's a really good point. So yeah, because thinking about it, the time it takes, for a partner, I guess you have to sort of be analysing all of this. The time it takes for a partner to give a piece of research to a more junior lawyer, for them to go off, and now it would be tools. In my day, it would be shuffle off to the library. But like, it's a bit sad, isn't it? But the time it takes, I can see that in terms of efficiency and workflow, actually, with these tools being super quick, even with the verification, actually, if you've got citations so that you can very quickly click through instantly, and I mean, I know you can't rush these things. That's obviously the point, isn't it? You've got to make sure you build into the process the importance of making sure that it's right. But it's quite, with the citations, it's super quick, isn't it? I mean, so I suppose you've got to consider in terms of efficiency, does it turn on its head the fact that the partner will be handing it off? Then there's the time gap between the junior having to absorb what the task is, whereas the partner just knows it, and they sort of can know. I mean, I can see why it would be potentially just as quick for it to do it themselves. But then there is that point, as you said, about the training. We're going to come on to that in terms of simulation, etc. But these types of exercises are super valuable in terms of bringing people on, aren't they?
They are, and I think it's important that we pick up the first point that you made as well around the other side of the equation, because this for me is about the possibility that the task mix changes rather than saying, well, we don't need X, Y, or Z resource. This is about roles evolving and doing different things and different skills being needed. And one area where I think AI could be really, really beneficial in developing junior lawyers is in allowing them to learn faster and contribute more at an earlier stage. And the example I would give there, you mentioned Definely. Definely is a product set that has a number of different elements to it. When we first made their draft and proof elements available, one of the things that does is help you to surface defined terms and cross-reference clauses really easily. And there was a concern that, well, hang on, if you can just double-click the definitions and you don't have to jump to the definition table, etc., do you understand the document in the same way? Do you get a feel for the structure in the way that you would have to do to be able to pick that apart in a different way? And I thought, I can see that. I can see the risk there. I can see why people might have that concern. What was really interesting speaking to our trainee cohorts was that they were saying, no, before we kept losing our train of thought. We're having to try and work out how this all fits together and jumping around things. Now we can read the actual operative provision and spend the time understanding what it says and why that matters for our client, the things that actually matter. We still get a feel for the document structure because we can click a button and jump to the relevant place if we want to, but it's a tool that makes some of the bits that are probably adding less value for clients a lot easier. And I think there is a risk sometimes that we think people learn doing things that aren't really that beneficial to clients and aren't really things that people need to learn. I remember, I've said to you before, sitting there with two massive property sale agreements and two rulers going down, checking all the changes have been put through. No one would suggest that we stop using redlining software and go back to a world where that is manually done because it helps people learn the documents. It doesn't. So we've just got to be realistic about that.
Does it change? I remember I still have trauma from being presented with a nuclear power station contract to familiarize myself with it. Like when I first joined the construction litigation department at Norton Rose. Yeah, those days are long behind us, thank goodness. But so does it change? Does that change? I'll come on pretty quickly to talk about the training, you know, that side of things. But like, does it, in terms of practically what enables juniors to do, and sort of their capability levels, does that, will that change what they're actually capable of doing, as well as how they become familiar? But will it change any of the balance of what they're doing?
So I think it will help them to develop more quickly, what one could argue, and this all remains to be firmed up and seen in due course. The other piece, you referenced Cascade, which is a part of Define Lee's newer functionality that I sort of helped them shape over a period of time. And where that's really interesting is it starts to show where Gen AI can help juniors to develop and potentially move up the value chain. And what it does is where there's a change made to a document, it analyzes where the potential knock-on changes are. So it'll say, I think this is the effect of the change, and I think you need to look at all of these other changes or the other areas of the contract where there is a potential knock-on effect. And this is my little explanation as a piece of Gen AI as to why I think you might need to amend that in light of that change. Now, some of that will be false positives. Some of it, the junior is going to need to look at and use their discretion as to, well, fall into three buckets. Do I need to do something about this? I think I do. I agree. Or, no, I'm confident that I've thought about this and it isn't relevant. I'm going to dismiss it. And then there'll be a third bucket where it creates conversation with supervisors around a point they're unsure on, and that will really help to develop their understanding of the document. But even aside from that, just having a piece of Gen AI say, I think this is related to what you're amending, and I've got this perspective on why you might need to do something about it. Having to engage with that and to critically analyze it is a really useful training exercise.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, it's funny because the way traditionally we would learn would be from our supervisor and relying on them giving this similar kind of feedback. But the difference is that often they wouldn't have the time to do that, right? Like, so they were, you know, not naturally extremely busy. Whereas I suppose it, you know, you sometimes we're guilty of thinking that things are worse, you know, oh, you know, you need to learn by osmosis, and but actually there are good examples of why people would learn more efficiently through this kind of technology than actually trying to learn from their partner.
Absolutely. I mean, you wouldn't train a fighter pilot through osmosis. Like, I know osmosis has worked well for the profession over a number of years, but there are plenty of professions where there are other ways of doing things. And that's not to say that learning by osmosis is dead, even in a hybrid world. There's still a place for it, but we have to accept that there are potentially opportunities to do things differently and enhance the training that the people receive. And Gen AI opens that door through those kinds of examples, and that's where we're at now. But potentially moving forward, there's some good work been done over in the States by some academics, Dr. Megan Marr, for example, around potentially creating simulations to train people on things like negotiation, for example. And those options we're at an early stage, but they're starting to open up things that weren't really that easy to do before. Yes, you could bring in actors. In some occasions, you know, we brought in clients to simulate those conversations, and that was really beneficial. But you can scale it and do so much more if you're using Gen AI to deliver that.
I've just seen an example similar to negotiation, I expect, but just so whereas that's perhaps on the contractual side, I'm not sure which one you're talking about, but there's an example in court where they're using AI to help people to prepare for deposition. And so, you know, similar sort of concepts, you know, they can be put through their paces just using AI rather than trying to rely on a human being. And I can see that extending throughout the whole gamut of transactional and litigation training. I mean, yeah, and probably to great effect, you know, because people don't have the time and it's expensive, etc., etc.
Absolutely. And actually, almost earlier in the process as well, before you get to developing the talent, there's a role for that kind of thing potentially in bringing talent in the first place and bringing the right talent in. So one of the areas where I think it could get really interesting, and we're not there yet, we haven't built anything that works or anything like that. I've got some prototypes and some ideas, but where I think it's really interesting is in the early talent space, where people might be nervous about applying for their first training contract, for example, and some people have access to professionals and can practice with those professionals, be it their parents or other family members or friends. Others don't. And whilst an AI agent is never going to be a substitute for an actual experienced professional who can produce that interview environment, I think there's going to be a real opportunity to say, look, come and have a play. You can have a conversation. It can follow the rough structure that we would expect an interview to follow. And whilst it's not a like-for-like replacement for a human interview, it will be an environment where you can start to practice a little bit and start to get more comfortable with the types of things you're going to be talking about. And I think that could be a really useful part of the arsenal from a social mobility point of view.
I love that. I think that's going to open up, because you can't underestimate the value of that kind of experience. And I love the fact that we'll be using it to open it up to people that wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity otherwise. You're developing a chatbot. I know it's early days, but that's right. It's sort of it's a chatbot. It's
a chatbot. It's a chatbot, and we're giving it transcripts of mock interviews and things to let it know our tone and the types of things we ask, and obviously we'll give it some instructions around the types of things it should be asking and how it should be structuring things. So hopefully I've not given too much away there as to how to do it, but to be honest, it's such an important thing that if every firm who listened to this went, oh, we're going to go and do that ourselves, I'd be quite pleased, to be honest. That would be quite a nice outcome. So yeah.
Good for you. So how do you maintain, so one of the things that people say you can't train for, and that people with the fear mongering is that we're going to lose. I kind of see the point is around that questioning mindset. How do you, the fact that you can see it in yourself sometimes, when you're doing a project or task and you think, oh, I'll just ask ChatGPT, nothing confidential, obviously. It's very easy to sort of start to hand off to AI, and because it's so good, for so many things now. Can you train people to maintain that? The challenge will be make sure that you don't get lazy. And I've heard this countless times from in-house and law firms. The challenge is, how do we make sure people don't get lazy? Can you train for that? How are you overcoming that or approaching it?
You absolutely can train for it, I think. And when you look at what skills are likely to be taken last by the robots, relationship building is going to be a key part of that, obviously. Those human relationships are going to be critical, but critical analysis is going to be the other bit. So I think you can train for it, and I think you must train for it. I think there's a really important point here, and I think we're at a really interesting stage because of how things are evolving. So we've had a Gen AI policy in place since 2023. We were quite early in putting that in place. I've been like a stuck record about it for many, many years now. Everybody knows they need to verify, they need to critically analyze, etc. In the early days of Gen AI, that was probably far easier to land as a message because people knew every time they checked something, there'd be something that needed correcting that wasn't quite right. The challenge for us as a profession is as things get better and more accurate, in reality, when you're verifying these things, you are increasingly receiving something that needs less and less correction. And my fear is unless you proactively engage with the need to train these skills and the need to constantly remind people of the messaging, when you get to 99.9% accuracy, persuading people to verify every time is going to be really, really challenging. And the 1 in 1,000 is going to cause you a problem. So yeah, I do think people really need to engage with it. How you do that is partly around the messaging. It's partly around communicating things. It's giving people some tips around, for example, in your situation, what I've started doing is sort of brainstorming first, a little pad of literally pen and paper, good old fashioned pen and paper, going, right, I know I'm about to do this task. Bang, 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 bang. They're the things that off the top of my head in a few seconds I think I need to think about and some thoughts. I then probably spend more time setting the direction. And I think if you look at those buckets of tasks that most professional services tasks can fall into, there's the setting of the direction and asking the question. There's then the actual execution, and then there's the evaluation afterwards. And the execution is where AI is going to have the biggest impact, actually drafting the letter, doing the research, etc. But our role is at the other two ends, setting that direction originally, asking those questions. And that's where up front, yes, you've done your brainstorm. Then you need to think really carefully around, right, what is it I'm actually trying to achieve? Which is obviously built off what is the client trying to achieve? What are we trying to do here? Getting that right helps to improve the AI's execution. And let's be clear, where we're at right now, the AI is not doing every bit of execution. I am thinking, well into the future here, but that is the direction of travel, that increasingly it will be able to do more and more of that execution. And then on the other side, it's that evaluation of saying, yeah, but is how I'm kind of framing it. Because you'll get something that looks impressive. Yeah, but what's different on this occasion? What's different for this client? What's it not thought about? And it's a mindset. It's a skill that can be taught and can be conditioned. And you need those regular prompts. So yes, we're communicating it in all the ways you'd expect. But if you take Co-Counsel, for example, what we have set up there is every time someone logs in, every single time, they are reminded about the need to verify and critically analyze, and they're reminded to refer to our AI policy and refresh themselves on that. So in addition to the mandatory training that we're doing and things like that, we have that regular repeat messaging to give people a gentle nudge in the right direction.
If you build it into the workflow, so it's right there at the time, that makes sense, doesn't it? Rather than sometimes, yeah, I think that makes sense. So in terms of sort of careers, looking at slightly from a high level or the bigger picture, I know, I know I get the sense that you're not a fan of Jevons. People talk a lot about Jevons paradox and which obviously was relating to coal and demand. But I get the impression that people have talked about that quite a lot, and that that perhaps you're not a fan of that analogy in terms of explain that to me.
So some people who've heard me speak will find it interesting that you think I'm not a fan of it, because it is something I've referenced a fair bit over time. And the idea, of course, is it's around efficient use of resources. And Mr. Jevons, Scottish economist, was looking at coal, and the assumption at the time, because they thought coal was going to run out, the assumption was, well, if we develop these more efficient steam engines, presumably the coal will last longer. And actually what he studied was, the consumption of coal goes up when you make its use more efficient, because you have far more use cases for it, etc. And the argument, of course, is we've seen this before with technology in law as well as other professions, where you make something more efficient and it realizes a load of latent demand, and the demand for the services far outstrips the impact of the efficiencies. I am not saying that that's wrong in this case. However, what I think is a really interesting point, which doesn't always get raised, is what the equivalent resource is. So what's the equivalent to coal in the scenario we're looking at? Is it human intelligence? Is the idea that as things become more efficient and each human can deliver more, we realize loads of latent demand and there's far more work overall on a net basis? If so, do I think Jevons paradox would hold up there? Yeah, I think there's a pretty good chance it will. However, is it human intelligence we're talking about, or is it intelligence? And if it's intelligence that we're talking about the efficiency of, then arguably, as that becomes more and more efficient, we will need more and more intelligence. There'll be more and more use cases, but that might be met increasingly by artificial intelligence rather than human intelligence. And that's where I think there's a bit of nuance there that isn't always picked up. And I'm not saying one view is right or wrong, but let's not nail our colours to the mast that this is definitely going to result in huge amounts more work than there was previously. I think we need to be honest that there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of uncertainty, and that can be really exciting. My sort of overarching thought on where we are at the moment, Caroline, with everything, is this is probably the most exciting time to be a lawyer ever. How cool is that? Who wouldn't want to be a lawyer in that environment?
A lot of people won't remember that. But I like your excitement. But do you think that means, in recognition of the fact that we don't know, it may be human, it may be AI, but there's still going to be a massive place for the human, but perhaps that means that we have to start to accentuate, we have to be honest, and we have to say, right, what skills are required right now in order to position the human as being the most valuable resource, and emphasizing all of the things that you can't get from AI. So relationship building. Do you think that do you think people are thinking about that right now enough? And what sort of skills do you think, what mix of skills do you think that we need to be really thinking about?
I would hope that most organisations and most individual lawyers are thinking about the skills they need to lean into and develop. And most lawyers will already have relationship building skills and things, but really focusing and emphasising on those. Do I think they are doing it enough? Not necessarily. I still think it's the old adage, isn't it, that we overestimate the impact in the short term and we underestimate it in the long term. And the pace of improvement of AI is absolutely staggering. And I looked at the meta benchmarking last night for the new Claude Opus model, and the trend line, which was already showing improvement of a doubling rate of every 7 months and arguably 4 months more recently, this model is not on the trend line. It's well ahead of where it should be on that trend line. So things are accelerating. Now, that's not for tasks that are legal specific, that is coding based, and it is what they call a jagged frontier. So the progression doesn't necessarily work directly, it can't be applied directly to other areas. But the general trend here is that things are accelerating really quickly, and I'm not sure people have necessarily fully embraced that yet. And I think it's really important that they do. So really, really focusing on those core skills of, right, how do I use the fact that I am actually a human and not a machine to develop a distinguishing factor and really give myself an edge? And for me, that is around the relationship building piece. And then as the critical analysis piece, AI will have a role in helping to do some of that critical analysis. And you can see the idea of a multi-stage process where one AI is challenging another AI and potentially even asking those questions and setting that direction up front. But ultimately, for a long time to come, we are going to need humans who are holding the pen on that direction setting and on that evaluation, not least because from a regulatory point of view, do we really see the profession shifting away from needing a human to approve and take accountability for some of these things from a regulatory perspective, from an insurance perspective? Who knows what might happen in the future, but I don't see that happening in the short term. So it's those kinds of things that people need to lean into, and they really need to lean into it.
I think with clients, there's a real opportunity, armed with AI. I think there's a demand amongst clients for better use of technology, for more use of technology. I think that has its complications. That's beyond this podcast, in terms of the practicality of some of that, to be frank. But I feel like armed with AI, there's the people who are really leaning in and engaging on a human to human level with AI underpinning it in order to meet that sort of need for greater efficiency and all of those things. It's not enough now to just go, we need to have great relationships, because the clients will get frustrated and go, you need to do things in a much better, more efficient, AI driven way. And I hear that all the time. But recognizing that you want that human to human contact underpinned by this willingness to change, and demonstration of change. I think that's really powerful, and actually I think, leaning into that, as you said, I think it's going to be super important. In terms of like a final takeaway, if you were to sort of say, right, I was to give you, I feel like I'm on Desert Island Discs now. What would you take away with you? No, what takeaway would you like other people to take away? Not what are you taking to your island? As much as sometimes we might want that. What would you want? What takeaway would you say to people if you sort of, to pass on one thing from this?
I think for me, it's a message that we need to embrace the change that is coming. It is coming. And we need to do something really exciting, which is embrace the fact that we are humans and that brings something unique, and really develop all of our people as humans who can contribute in this world that is changing and can contribute well in that world. I think it's about not being scared. The reality is this wave is coming one way or another, and you can debate when it's coming and what the impact will be, etc., and that is all open to debate. But the change is coming, and the important thing is helping people to build the skills they need to be resilient, to be agile, and to thrive in this changed world. That's what it's all about.
Brilliant. All right. Well, look, we're at time, and thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think you're absolutely right. I think this is going to be a year of really focusing on the human, which I'm grateful for, to be frank, because I feel like we all need it. We need to sort of recognise the humanity, and the need for connection and all of those things amidst this huge period of change. So I'm really grateful for you for chatting through some of your approaches and strategy, and hopefully we can chat again in the not too distant future.
That would be lovely. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, Sam.